for joining us. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I am Anara Tabushalieva, along with co-host Dr. Victor Fett, Dr. Katerina Shrey, and our program producer, Professor Larry Sherray. We host a weekly discussion panel on Russia's war on Ukraine with guests from Ukraine, military experts, medical personnel, academics, artists, literary figures, and relief workers. Our panel is recorded and circulated nationally and internationally. We appreciate your comments and feedback. Special thanks to Marshall University Libraries and MUIT for making this weekly event possible. If you are joining us live on Teams, please feel free to post any questions for our guest. A quick greetings to our viewers in Ukraine from Dr. Katerina Shrey.
Вітаємо наших слухачів в Україні з глибоким покліном. Ми далі свідки вашого страшного терпіння і також вашої великої сили. Дякую вам за вашу участь в нашій тижневій програмі.
Thank you, Katerina. Today's guest is Professor Victor Fett.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for coming. I know we are experiencing some connection problems, so this will be mostly recording. We only have few guests, but we decided to go on with this important update. And the presenter is me, and this is a report, a tribute to our friends and co-authors who, for the fourth year right now, under the constant attacks of Russian army, are putting together many books of poetry, mostly in Ukrainian, but also in Russian language, because there are many dozens, hundreds of poets who still write, notwithstanding the war, in Russian language. And this is the remarkable feat which we are honored to participate in. I happen to be the compiler, the editor of this book for fourth consecutive year. The book, again, in Russian completely. This year included 120 authors and was published in Kiev in December of 2025 by wonderful publisher Oleg Fedorov. I will tell you just a little bit about the book, and we will take questions. The book, as I said, is in Russian. It's a tradition of mostly rhymed and metered poetry. This volume included 120 authors, some of which are already not with us. Here is the cover, and I will try to translate this little few lines by Anatoly Lemish, who is a refugee from Ukraine in Paris, the older generation poet, who says in this quote, "As we are trying to walk the blade in the world which is likely to kill us, we are clinging to our poetry, and maybe it is clinging to us." 3 previous years of Year of Poetry, as I said, published by Oleg Fedorov Publishing House, a large enterprise in Kiev. Here is a little drawing of the publisher himself. He was with us presented in our program, and you can see it on YouTube from more than 2 years ago. His wonderful publisher house is called, printing house, is called Drukarsky Dvir, which makes some kind of ironic reference to his namesake, the first, one of the first printers from 16th century, Ivan Fedorov, who was actually from what now is Belarus and worked in Imperial Russia for a while and fled from there. It was an interesting story from over 500 years ago. The covers are done by a wonderful modern artist from Kiev, also Nikolai Mikola Solohub. And here is a little picture of his studio in Kiev. Both publisher and artist are unflinching heroes, and it is our honor to help and support them. We have, as I said, 120 authors, almost evenly divided between Ukraine itself, United States, and Europe and Israel. 39 total from Ukraine, 36 from US, 24 from Europe, from 12 countries. And these are people, as I said, writing more or less professionally. I would say we select poetry. It's not just haphazard selection. But people who fled, who were educated in the USSR, moved, relocated, emigrated, fled in different times, people of different generations, but all drawing from this legacy, which now becomes very archaic but still inspiring, of 19th, 20th century, trying to use their language as a weapon, as skill which allows to preserve sanity and to help those who cannot abandon this language, which is often the case during the war. Some faces of people who are represented in this volume. Many of them are staying in Ukraine, like Lyudmila Nekrasovskaya. Many are refugees in Europe, like Maria Vasilkovskaya, who was a guest of our program. Wonderful Victoria Nikolaeva, who is a double war refugee from, she's from Odessa, and now she's under war conditions in Israel as well, you may say. I will read not many texts because, as I said, texts are in Russian, and we do have good translations to English by very professional, very skilled modern translators. Here is just one representative text, which you can see and read from the screen, by one of the leading Russophone Ukrainian poets, Boris Khersonsky, who lives now in Italy for a few years. He published many, many books in Ukraine, and he is originally from Odessa. The English translation is of one of the 2022 poems written just a few months after the war started by his wife Lyudmila Khersonskaya. I will read it. Here are two angels. The first one shouts, "Run. Enemies will come to your house soon." The second one says, "Stay here if you can, and they may not find you under the sun." Here comes the third one. He whispers, "Calm your fear, straighten your bent spirit. Life is a river, so bring it to the banks in an old man's groan and an enemy's camps." The fourth one is silent, his mouth is waxed, traces of beating on his face, wings cut off, white robes with spots of blood. Go on if only you can live like this. Stay, run or hide, whatever you might. Lips are closed, the gaze blurred, the sunset is bloody and the dawn is red, and there are no feasts or gifts for you. There are dozens or hundreds of texts like this, which are now in many depositories across the world, in the original, coming into translation to other languages, already a part of our rapidly changing history. And it's, as I said, our great honor to be a part of this, both with this editorial effort and informational program which we're running right now. Inna Kvasivka, one of the best young generation poets in Odessa, as well as Yana Vishnyakova from Zaporizhia. Dmitry Bliznyuk is one of the leading Russian and Ukrainian language poets. His new book in full translation in English is upcoming this year in the US. He probably is the most translated of our authors into English. He says that there are now about 200 of his poems translated. Of course, poetry, as someone said, is what is lost in translation, but still for history, for future generations who will look at these texts created under enormous tragedy and what we can see and publish in real time, I think what these people are doing is very important and very heroic. Irina Yevsa, one of the best older generation poets who lives now in Germany, she uh, fled in the first weeks of war from Kharkiv. She will be our guest next week on February 20th from Germany. Andrei Kostinsky stays in Kharkiv, and we correspond all the time, and he is gladly, like Irina and many others, given his poems to our anthology, adding enormous value and edge and tragedy. People from all over across the world, many from Israel, professional, very good poets, Olga Gurdin, Emerson, Nina Gade from Denmark was a couple of times on this program. We're trying to alternate literary programs as well as cultural. Galina Itzkovich, psychologist from the States, who was many times also on this program and one of the prominent authors. Radislav Guslin, Orthodox Ukrainian priest from Portugal. Marina Eskin from Boston, USA. Emilia Pisochina, whose program just was aired from Germany on our friends' website, Vita Stivelman's, etc. club in Toronto. We have many activities. I wish we had dozens and hundreds. We do have some, but definitely not enough. Very important figures in our field, like Viktor Kagan from Germany, a psychologist, and wonderful Anatoly Liberman from the States, who was talking about Eurasianism on our program. I need to say a few words about another book by, again, one of the authors contributing to our anthology, Serena Yurchuk, from originally from Kharkiv, now also in Germany. Her book, called Nadzemny Perehid, or Overpass, was published by the same publisher in the same year, and it represents a very interesting and probably novel approach of combining in the same book her original poetry in Russian and Ukrainian. She is fully bilingual, and also her translations of poetry from Russian to Ukrainian, mostly texts by poets who are our contemporaries and moreover support Ukraine in its fight. In this way, we can, publisher and translator and others, strive to preserve not only the texts themselves, but the historical meaning of this bilinguality, as Alexander Kabanov, another prominent poet of today, said back in 2016, the language of the enemy, the tongue of the enemy, which is Russian now for Ukrainians. Many think that to separate these two goals, two identities, is now important, that language itself can be used as a weapon and as an instrument against the aggressor, speaking the same language. It's a unique situation to which, of course, talents of poets would contribute. Another project which overlaps with ours is the series Artelen, both poetry and prosaic pieces, which are published by wonderful Nikolai Lobanov, also one of our authors, and a small critical essay by Igor Pavlyuk in Russian, translated from Ukrainian, is included in our volume as well. Nikolai now published right a couple of days ago 17th annual volume of the book. He edits over 800 authors since 2012, And again, this is international anthology, both in Ukrainian and Russian, one of the few of this kind. We're very glad to support this project as well. Finally, there are translations into English, and Julia Nemirovskaya from Oregon, Slavic language teacher, was writing in our anthology about Kapilka project. Kapilka, or Coin Bank, is a international group of translators, which has been represented on our program 3 times over the last 3 years. And it is a depository which contains thousands of pages of poems written by hundreds of poets. And again, we are proud to present some of these authors in our own anthology. Here are 2 translation anthologies, and more are coming, which come from the Kapilka or Coinback project. And again, many names which you can see there, many names of poets and translators, they overlap with what we see in other anthologies. There are many different efforts by different publishers, both traditional paper books and websites and online resources. I would again prefer to see much more, but obviously I do not know about all of them, and we're just part of this flow. Finally, as I said, a few authors are gone already. We published a few people killed in this war. Elena Mudrova, translated into English by some of the people I listed above, lived in Kharkiv. She was killed on March 20th, 24, by a Russian missile. Her poetry is well known, and here is her poem translated by Maria Blostein, a wonderful translator from Toronto, published in East-West Literary Forum, which is online journal, published in New York by Nina Kosman, another of our authors. The sky was gone. I thought that wouldn't last. I left for home, and once the year has passed, came back to find the air turned water dense. I must have gotten lost somehow, I guess. At home the sky was also gone, and there was trailed closely by the watery air, along just within sight, until it up and tore away in fright, when like a fish I gasped till I could feel the oxygen flow swiftly through my gills. I sighed, got used to water, lost my fear, but all the sky was missing everywhere. Last name to show is Vladislav Loza, who died defending his country in 2024 as a soldier of the Ukrainian Navy. He was 25 years old. He was a contributor of our first anthology in 22. Very talented young poet and philosopher, linguist, and I just give you a few lines of his poems published in our anthology, which I tried to dub into English. There are very, very few of us left. I couldn't prevent the disaster. Something howled, something tore at the leaves, flashed by like a shadow in the garden. Your gaze, full of bright reproach, was drowning in the darkness. I left only a little ash, and even that is scattered across the earth. Vladislav Loza, the defender of Ukraine. Slava Ukraine.
Heroям слава.
Thank you, Katerina. I know we had issues with connection, so some people are reporting that they couldn't get on. There is some kind of intermittent link glitch, but we have several people more than we have some other times. So I will take any questions. We have time, and I will try to answer for the authors which are not here. I know Kiev has no electricity right now. At least some of my friends reported they will not be here because of outage, controlled outage, I should say.
I'm really grateful that you shared both photographs of the poet Vlad Loza. Um, it's amazing. In the two photos, the first photo you shared, he is holding his weaponry. He's dressed in his battle gear, and in the second photo you showed next to this picture, he just looks like a young man in college, and it is just such a strong reminder of what our young people in Ukraine, what their young adulthood looks like right now. And this has been the norm now for what, 4 years? Um, it is quite powerful, these visuals. That poem you read by him as well is amazing in its like honesty, brutality. Um, I took a screenshot as you were reading, so I have the text in front of me, and it is just so real, so raw, and there are very, very few of us left. I couldn't prevent the disaster. Something howled, something tore at the leaves, and it goes on. It just uh, um it really does make us aware of the horrors our young people are experiencing on the front lines and the daily losses. So I'm very, very grateful that you shared his poem, and the other poems as well. These are quite amazing. The one of the poems that you led with, the one from Elena Mudrova, starts with "The sky was gone." What an amazing statement. Like, how is that possible? And yet this is our the people in Ukraine are living with the impossible. And just the whole that simple statement, the sky was gone, is so loaded, uh, and so full of meaning. And the poem that you started us out with, Boris Hershansky's, about the angels, two angels, but actually there's four angels, and that last angel was silent. Such a vivid description of what Ukraine is. If you had to envision what Ukraine might look like as a being, what a beautiful job he's done. I think it's the face beaten, mouth waxed, robe stained in blood, wings cut off. And so I just what a thank you for making this selection of poems to share with us. I know I have the previous volumes, and I know that there's amazing treasures within those pages. I was very grateful to you, Victor. This was really good. I'm very grateful to you.
Thank you. And I'm very, well, honored. The glad is not the word, but we all are honored to help in any small way. And this publishing, I trust, is not a small way, because we do have, as I said, over 100 authors. Um, we published 4 years in a row. And for what it's worth, anthologies like this are being published also in other countries, of course, not in Russia itself, but we shouldn't forget that this is specifically done to give some kind of niche to Russian language, which is native language of poets, now under aggression from Russia. So it's rather a unique case. I can talk for hours, and we did talk a lot on this program about fate of this strange civilization and culture and post-Soviet trans linguistic landscape. We will have actually a speaker professional this spring who will talk exactly about this linguistic landscape in Ukraine. It is changing. It's changing rapidly, unpredictably, and tragically. The problem with poetry is always that it is not completely conscious. We, and I am one of the authors of this anthologies, I can talk about this from internal perspective, so to say, and I did. We do not control what we write, especially when we don't have a choice. Some of our authors are fully bilingual, like wonderful Irina Yurchuk or Emilia Pisochina or others. They can switch. They can use both languages or prefer to stick to one. Some of other authors that we presented on this program are switching to Ukrainian right now, like wonderful Grigory Falkovich, who is not writing in Russian anymore. Some have stopped completely writing at all. There is a poet in the States, Alexander Gabriel, who coined a line, which in translation sounds, I'm learning a high art to be silent in Russian. Of course, this is the choice also, but again, as I said, choice is not completely conscious. On the other hand, we have people who have very little connection to Ukraine, who emigrated from other parts of the former Soviet Union decades ago, but whose native language, the only one in which they can write poetry, is Russian, and who feel compelled to support the victim, support Ukraine, not Russia in this fight. And then finally, we have, I hope, a large segment of creativity in Russia itself, which is now suppressed. Only a few brave people, heroes we know about. They are submitting their writings, many under pen names, into some books and websites. That's also one of the components. So for those who will study all that and already are studying, of course, a message is that the language, the Russian language, whatever it will be, it is splitting as it never did before. It has been splitting for a long time, but unfortunately, unlike English or Spanish or Arabic, it didn't split into many historical entities. It's a monoculture, like Greece, something like this. If you think back to classics, there are no analogies. On the other hand, we live in modern world where language can be studied, learned, preserved, archived by even non-human intelligence, by machines. So there are many different opinions on where are we going. My own feeling is that wherever we are going, we are doing it very fast. And moreover, this dynamics is already seen if you look at our 4 volumes of this very anthology. For example, in the very first volume, I just give you one example. In the very first volume, when I just collected people who want to support Ukraine, I took everything, including Shakespeare sonnets translations into Russian, which have probably very tangential relationship to modern situation, but it was someone's creative output, and I wanted to give voice even to that very traditional occupation. It's wrong to think that all poems we publish are about war. They're about everything. We were trying, in fact, to do a cross-section, entire spectrum, and it's interesting to see what traditional themes are missing. For example, humor, but also satire. There is no place anymore for humor, which is understandable, but there is absolutely no place for irony. Irony is gone. There is nothing to be ironic about. There is place for lyrics, but obviously almost no place for light verse. It's just not the seasonal offerings. And so on. There is tragedy in these poems, but you can easily see when a person wants to write tragic verse, but technically cannot do it. That's also a very strange and understandable situation. They don't know how, because above all, poetry is also a technical thing requiring some, let's say, skill. It's easy to deal with mechanistic skill, which has no feeling. I don't take this into ontology, but it's very hard to deal with earnest feelings which are done unskillfully. Question? No? Okay, sorry, I'm going in my lecture mode.
No, I mean, it's fascinating, and we've been talking. I do see that Leslie has his hand up, so I'm going to yield the microphone. But
yes, please, Leslie.
This is a very worthwhile conversation, Leslie.
Well, I'm afraid I'm not going to discuss poetry. I was more going to bring up news reports I heard recently about the levels of aid that Europe and the United States have been giving to Ukraine. And if anyone else, like Dr. McAllister, wants to jump in and comment on this, they can. But the bad news that I've heard is that the amount of aid that the United States gave to Ukraine last year declined by 99% from the previous year. The good news is that the aid from Europe increased by like 50 some, close to 60%, which gets sort of close to making up for the gap left by America, but not quite all the way.
This was a question to Dr. McAllister, I believe. If he
can comment on it if you want.
Okay. If he is with us. I'm sorry. Yes.
Hi. Yeah, I saw those same statistics the other day as well. The only reason it's 1% was that there was still some aid left in the pipeline from the Biden administration. Where it is, and this has become particularly important this winter, and I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, where it's become particularly salient, is that NATO always had a division of labor. Because it made sense, then not everybody tried to replicate every military capability. You wouldn't want everybody building their own armored units, and everybody kind of specialized in what they were best at, and there was an attempt to coordinate that in NATO. That's the way NATO military planning worked. And one of the things the United States always led on was air defense, both tactical and to some degree strategic, although defending against ballistic missiles is, even short-range ballistic missiles, is difficult. And because of that, and because the United States has been slow to provide, especially Patriots, the most capable of the systems, Ukraine's had a very, very rough winter. This has been a very tough winter for them. Europe has begun to fill the gap. Europe always contributed more than it was often portrayed. If you go back and look at some of those charts, and I don't have any with me right now, but if you go back and look at them, they were always pretty close to even. Europe just a little bit ahead. It was often portrayed that the United States had provided everything and Europe had provided very little. That was never true. Europe has stepped up, but there are some capabilities that it's more difficult for them to step up quickly. Building air defenses is a very complex thing. Those are very high value and often pretty low density. You don't have a lot of those missiles. And one of the things the Russians have done is overwhelm Ukrainian air defenses. When you're talking about missile defenses or air defenses, the simplest strategy, offense is always cheaper than defense, always, usually by several times as cheap.
Wow.
So,
that's I'm sorry for interrupting you, but
that's okay. No, go ahead.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And you're going to say several
factors. Yeah, 3-4 times cheaper.
Wow.
Air defense is really complicated because you got to have very complicated radars. There's a lot of infrastructure that goes into that. And when you start to talk about, that's defense against aircraft, when you start to talk about defense against missiles, and I went into this a couple of weeks ago, the longer range the missile is, the more expensive it is. This is why we develop MIRVs, multiple independently targeted reentry vehicles. Sorry, my old grad school stuff's coming back. all the acronyms. We developed MIRVs for a simple reason. If you put more than one warhead on each missile, you overwhelm the opponent's defenses. And the simplest way to break through ballistic missile defense is just to put up more targets than they can shoot down. And so defense is always cheaper. Always cheaper. Excuse me, offense is always cheaper. I said
Okay, good.
Sorry. Offense is always cheaper. And overwhelming a defense is always the simplest thing to do. I mean, if you remember one of the stats I gave a couple weeks ago, just to shoot down, say, 10 ICBMs launched from North Korea would require 1,600 interceptors in space to catch them in their boost phase. So even just 10 requires a massive, massive expenditure in missile defense. It's just real. And when you try to put, if you're talking about missile defense in space, you're talking about many factors more expensive.
Thank you. Wow.
Yeah, the missile defense. I've been having my PhD advisor actually negotiated the ABM treaty. He was on the negotiating team, and so I've been in the missile defense. I've been studying missile defense for a long time, and people are always surprised when you tell them that we can't defend against a missile attack, but we can't.
I see Ryan Costanzo has his hand up. Please join the conversation. If you feel comfortable putting on your camera, that's great, but whatever you're comfortable with.
Hi, Ryan.
Yeah, this is also for probably Dr. McAllister, but sounds like 2 hours ago, Trump was leaving the White House to get on Marine One. It says Zelensky is going to have to get moving. Russia wants to make a deal, and Zelensky is going to have to get moving. Otherwise, he'll miss a great opportunity. Is this like just a continuing to buy into Putin's talking points?
There's been a lot of talk that the pressure is really being put on the Ukrainian negotiators to come up with a settlement as quickly as possible. And Zelensky's even mentioned that he believes that Trump wants a peace agreement before the midterms. And what it looks like now, what it appears now, and from some of the leaks that have come out from what Kushner and Witkoff and those folks have been doing in the discussions with Dmitriev, that they are upping the pressure on Ukraine to give up the rest of Donbass. About 20% of Donbass is still in Ukrainian hands. And this is really significant. And it may sound like, gosh, give up a small amount of territory. But there's a couple of things. First of all, Ukrainians are dead set against giving up territory. There's 190,000 people or so that live in that 20% of the Donbass. There's been talk about making it a demilitarized zone or something, but that's really a difficult thing to work out and to make it. I mean, without a substantial foreign military presence there, European, NATO military presence there, to protect the independence of that would be a very difficult thing to agree to. But the other thing is, and I think I mentioned this to one of my earlier presentations, the Ukrainians have spent a lot of money defending that particular piece of territory in Donbass. They put a lot of their defenses, they fortified that region very carefully, minefields and vehicle obstacles and all kinds of stuff. And to be honest, I think rather than wanting that territory because it's full of Russian speakers or whatever excuse that Vladimir Putin comes up with now, I think that's really the objective. Because once you start to get beyond and you start to get close to Kramatorsk and some of those places, then Ukraine starts to get a lot flatter. And the ground starts to be a lot more difficult to defend. And you start to get into the plain as you head toward Kyiv, and it makes it much more difficult to defend. And I I don't want to be too hyperbolic, but if you go back to Munich in 1938, Why did Hitler really want the Sudetenland? Was it because the Czechs had spent a couple $1 billion fortifying the mountain passes in that area? Hitler said it was about Germans who lived in the Sudetenland that were oppressed minority, but what he really wanted was to make Czechoslovakia a lot more difficult to defend. And sure enough, 6 months or so after the Munich Agreement, he took the rest of Czechoslovakia, March 1939. It's pretty reminiscent of that.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. This is what we read in the news right now, and it's again very, very disturbing, needless to say.
Victor, just a quick comment to go back to the poetry.
Yes, let's.
It is interesting. I just read recently an anthology of short fiction by contemporary Ukrainian writers, and it is about the war. But just as you said with God Poezii, not every contribution is about the war. There's also about, I mean, the war is happening. It's clear this is written during the time of the war, but there are stories of heartbreak, divorce, marital problems. There's like all the ordinary things that challenge people continue to happen under the war. But what does go away is a lot of the joy, what you were saying. Like there's no, and so the collection I read has like maybe 35, 40 pieces in it. And obviously no comedy. I didn't think about the no satire, but you're right. There's for that it's as well, no satire. It's interesting, the literary response, the literary output of our writers, our poets, and our writers, our creators. Um, obviously, it's affected by the circumstances under which they write, but it makes it even so much more an enriched product. I think when people look back and try to understand the horror of this time period, they certainly will have access to the information Dr. McAllister shares, and those are really, really incredible, amazing, useful facts. But they will also have access to these literary expressions, literary understandings, or attempts to understand the horror of the war. And so, I'm again just very grateful for the work that you've done and continue to do. I didn't realize that you had been the editor all along of every volume. I'm actually kind of curious that you started talking about what prompted that first volume's creation. Do you have a team, or is it just you who does the editing?
I do the editing, and Kiev, a wonderful team, does all the publishing steps, proofreading and everything, and typesetting. What prompted it was we had some kind of previous experience with my colleagues for 4 years prior to the full-scale war. I was one of the editors of similar volumes. They were called A Day of Russian Expat Poetry, which we published in Germany, in Frankfurt. Usually these were smaller volumes, about 50, 60 people, and also including some critical essays, a lot of translations into Russian. So it wasn't specifically related to Ukraine. When the full-scale war started, it was my idea to recreate similar format in Kiev, because I was publishing my own poetry collections there in the same publishers, and I knew they could put together larger volumes. These volumes are enormously large. The last one is almost 700 pages, and very thin. It's the main problem here is to send it across the world, actual authors' copies, the paper books. We also distribute electronic PDFs for free. It's not a for-profit project, so anyone who doesn't have it and wants to have it, just contact me, and I am sending all the files.
Your own productivity has really multiplied during these last couple of years. I mean, from what I can tell, you've put out at least 5 books, I think.
7, and the 8th is ready. And my own, yes, that's a special case, but I see a lot of people who write. The war triggered creativity in many. That's also true. It's a trauma experience, it's a protection, it's a desire to say things, not always, again, in a technically brilliant way, but a lot of names we knew before the war are still going on. The problem with specifically Russian language is that if you look into the future, my personal feeling is that we are in a limited time window because I do not see how this creativity will be further reproduced in future generations, because people who write in immigration, like myself, I live outside of the Soviet Union for almost 40 years. They're older generation. What is going on inside Russian-speaking Russian Federation, I don't know. But my general feeling about this type of writing is that it is going extinct very soon. So again, I can talk, and I did talk and write about it for last couple of years quite a lot. My other interesting observation is that we cannot make any analogies. First analogy which comes to people's mind are culture and literature in German after the Second World War, in Hebrew over the last 80 years, in Latin and Romance languages. I maintain, as a non-linguist, as an evolutionary specialist, if you wish, that none of these analogies will work in modern world. And we might be very well, people who are represented in this anthologist, the younger generation might be very well the last generation writing, not just in Russian, but writing what they write. This language, in my opinion, will not serve as it did serve anymore, because the best names which we know in Russian poetry, for those who doesn't know these names, I can give a reference in a couple of dozen outstanding names. Most of those were writing against the pressure in situations when they were under enormous pressure from their own circumstances, government, war, repressions, and so on. What we probably, I think, observe now is the final stage of this process, where there is no more reproduction, no more cycles of the same broken instrument. But I may be mistaken, of course, and I don't want to sound gloomy, just because Russian language is not the worst casualty of this war. Let's say this. Bob, I see your hand. Do you have a question?
No, I just wanted to say, did I hear right? 7 books?
8.
8. Congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you.
I mean, I've been doing 1 and I thought it either might kill me or my wife might divorce me. 8 is off the charts.
But you're
It's
right.
good stuff. It's actually very good stuff.
You're writing in prose, Bob. It's different. It's much harder.
He has a
Okay.
fan base. Victor has a fan base in Philadelphia, which is really sweet.
Yeah.
And talking about language, it's interesting. One of my kids is studying overseas right now, and he is in a house with kids his age from all over the world. Literally, there's somebody from India, somebody from Spain. I think there's someone from Korea, and there is a young man from Ukraine. And my son has been practicing his Ukrainian, so he was very excited to speak to this young man, this housemate. But the housemate doesn't speak Ukrainian, but he's learning. He's learning, and it's very adamant. The housemate has chosen um, to avoid his native language. He's actually more comfortable or trying harder to speak in English because he has some background in there and trying to learn Ukrainian. And for us in the diaspora, for the Ukrainian immigrant community, it was always a point of pride to speak Ukrainian. And in fact, any Ukrainian, like when I was growing up, would have been insulted had somebody spoke Russian to them. And in fact, when the Soviet Union broke up and we were able to travel freely to Ukraine, it was kind of making a point to speak in Ukrainian when we were in Ukraine, and and be fresh. I don't just be almost like insulted with people speaking Russian to us because this is Ukraine. So the Ukrainian immigrant community is extremely protective of the Ukrainian language, to the point where we have schools in Ukrainian Saturday schools. I remember being Plast camp, which is like scouts, and one of the rules was no English. Like if you were, that was like one of the things you could get a demerit mark for. And so being the protection of the language. My father in Kiev almost got into a physical fight with someone for speaking to him in Russian. This is obviously decades ago. And so it's interesting now that at least what I'm seeing in the immigrant community in Philadelphia, there's a lot more grace extended to people who are Ukrainian but speak Russian. They didn't choose what language they're going to be born speaking. My kids didn't choose to be born into an English speaking world. And so it at least in the Ukrainian immigrant community, there's a little bit of grace, like a more language tolerance, and at the same time, there's a lot of effort on just about everybody to speak Ukrainian. There's and I think there's the word for this, like the mixture of the two. Is it surgic? Is that what like a
Yeah.
yeah? I'd never heard this. This is a new term for me, but they apparently like there's this effort. If you can't speak Ukrainian, speak as much Ukrainian as you can and supplement with the Russian words. But your observations about the impact on language, on the Russian language since the beginning of this war have been fascinating and spot on just the entire time. We talk about complexities of identity and the role of language. And so again, your book is a great opportunity to revisit that conversation and continue to have an appreciation for the linkage between identity and spoken and chosen language.
Thank you, Katerina. And this is why we're trying on this program to bring so many cultural figures and linguists and people do not realize in this country. Of course, we don't know the details, but when you start making analogies, again, it's hard for average American student or even professor to appreciate, for example, um, what comes natural for a German-speaking native, like we had Professor Ulrich Schmidt from Switzerland last month, and who wrote History of Ukrainian Literature. Of course, we didn't go into details on German with him, but for a German-speaking Swiss person, as far as I know, it comes very natural that they have very little, if any, relationship or responsibility for people in other speaking German countries.
It's interesting.
People here do not realize that there was no unified Germany or Italy until 19th century. And in the same way, when modern, more specifically on our point, when modern Putin's Russia tries to make itself a successor and usurper not only of modern Ukraine, but also of medieval cities and countries like Rus, it's the question of identity which you grow up with. And if, of course, if you are not an expert, I grew up with my English taught by Soviet teachers, and I didn't really know as a kid difference between British and English. So when I met some Scottish people later, I accidentally called them English. This was not very safe approximation, although their language was English. And in again, analogy to Ukraine doesn't work because when imperial-minded people right now in Moscow tell us that many Ukrainian nobility were builders of the empire in 18th, 19th centuries, when many cultural figures like artist Repin or writer Gogol, who stem from modern Ukraine and were Ukrainian by birth, that they switched to imperial Russian culture and became a Russian in this way, it's very hard to sort, especially when many of those were fiction writers like Gogol, who were writing about old times from a certain perspective. So it's really very bizarre. Uh, like I give you just one little example. When I grew up in Soviet Union as a boy, my probably first American book that I read in English was Tom Sawyer. So obviously I imagined myself Middle America as Tom Sawyer's country.
Mhm.
And I don't know what is left of Mark Twain's legacy right now. Maybe some caves and the characters go are still there in Missouri. But obviously, mentality and the famous scene of painting the fence um, is not very much understandable to a modern child of this age.
You're true.
I may be mistaken. So minor things like this, and talking about Ukraine in this context, when people of my generation grew up in Soviet Union, many of them honestly thought that Ukraine for Russia is like Provence for France, some southern province which has slightly different culture, much warmer climate, much better fruits and vegetables, and generally is a nicer place to live because it's not so cold. So our perception was more like climatic and gastronomical, which sometimes people limit themselves understanding of any culture to these aspects, I guess. Okay, if we have no more questions from the mesmerized audience, I again apologize to those who couldn't log on today. We had some link problem, which we hope to fix next week. This was 207th weekly meeting of M-Ukraine podcast discussion group in Marshall University, West Virginia. I will ask Dr. Shea to say a couple of words to our Ukrainian viewers.
Дорогі браття і сестри в Україні, ми зберігаємо вас в наших щоденних думках і молитвах. Нехай милосердний Бог тримає вас у своїй опіці. До наступного тижня. Прощаємося.
Слава Україні!
Героям слава. Thank you, Victor.